Welcome to New Realities. My name is Alan Steinfeld, and on this program I like to explore the expanding consciousness of the spiritual culture that's emerging in America. And that includes many fields that have been maybe ignored in the past. Things like astrology, tarot, Kabbalah. These are pathways to enlightenment, to our spiritual evolution. And one of the other approaches has been something called sacred geometry. I'm at a sacred geometry conference with one of the star presenters, Bruce Rawles, and he's going to be talking to us about the connection between consciousness, spirituality, and these forms, these great geometric forms that have an impact on who we are, on our consciousness, on art, and where we can go in the future as we incorporate these forms into our daily life. So thank you, Bruce, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I mean, sacred geometry is such a vast subject. And I think the basis of it has to begin with how do form affect consciousness? How do these triangles, squares, circles, which are basic shapes, affect how we think? Because that's where I think the conversion of making a sacred art.
That I might suggest that might be half of the question.
Okay, what's the other half?
The other half might be the reciprocal question: is how does our consciousness influence form?
Okay,
so, I mean, they're really interrelated.
No, I think that's great.
And in one sense, the classic alchemical wisdom might be the cause and effect relationship might be more closely aligned to our consciousness manifests and percolates and trickles down into form.
Consciousness is actually a geometric form, you're saying?
Right. Matter itself is frozen music, as someone once said. I forget the exact attribution to that, but that's basically it. We're experiencing our vast multidimensional reality, what we really are, you and I.
Yes, and everyone else
watching.
Although, yes.
We're beings that have chosen to, as one of the other presenters said this week, the ticket we paid was, the price of admission was, I choose to forget most of this vast multidimensional nature that I am.
Right.
But we're kind of helping each other remember. We're getting to the point where we're realizing that our consciousness really does have, at its core, a reality that transcends form and yet can manifest in form.
So let's get very basic and
Sure,
define what consciousness is, because a lot of people use that word on this program, and they all have their own. So I call it awareness. What do you call it?
Well, it's the awareness of being.
The awareness of being.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a body to be aware of being.
Right.
I mean, anyone who's had a lucid dream can tell you that you can have tremendously vivid experiences that don't necessarily involve this,
So aware of being is consciousness, right. And there are different types of awareness of being.
Right.
So what shape would reflect an awareness of being? I mean, or does it go that way?
Well, there's certain primal shapes that we all have in common, one might say.
Okay.
If anyone has studied the work of Drumville and Melchizedek, who's done a great service to humanity in popularizing through his Flower of Life workshops, the understanding that we start out as a sphere, the fertilized egg that brings us entry into this material realm becomes two through a shape called the Vesica Pisces,
where the two circles or two spheres overlap and form something in the middle.
Exactly.
The Vesica Pisces meaning the eye of the fish, right?
Actually, it's the bladder of the fish.
The bladder of the fish?
Yeah, well, that's the derivation.
That what Vesica Pisces?
That's
I
what
knew
it
it was a fish.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So most people don't go around talking about what beautiful fish bladders you have, that sort of thing.
So Drumville started, kind of brought this idea of sacred geometry back into a kind of popular culture.
Right.
And so consciousness of being, awareness of being would be, let's say, the form of a sphere.
Right. So you take the sphere, you divide that sphere into two as the process of biologic evolution unfolds.
Right.
That pair of spheres, which also begins to have a geometric form along the lines of a toroid.
What's a toroid?
A torus is a three-dimensional ring structure. The two become four. The four are a tetrahedral shape, which then becomes, dividing from the 4 into the 8, which is another mystical number, a star tetrahedron. That star tetrahedron is also the primal form which resonates with what's called the Merkaba, and that is essentially a toroidal form.
Toroidal form means like it's kind of a donut in
A donut shape of sorts, right.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's a vortical form. It's basically
it creates a energy pattern, a vortex of energy in its toroidal shape.
Right. The toroidal shape is really interesting because it has the unique property for three-dimensional objects that it requires 7 colors to decorate its surface in order to not have 2 adjacent colors touching. You can devise a topology where it requires 7 different colors, which symbolically and metaphorically, and I think that's where geometry gets real interesting from my perspective. If we look at the metaphors that come up in our life, from the people we meet to the seemingly chance occurrences that happen, the interconnectedness and the law that underlies consciousness becomes evident. And the toroidal form is just one more example of that.
The 2 intersecting tetrahedrons, which people call a Merkaba, would that create a toroidal form?
It does. It does. In fact, that form surrounds every cell, every living organism, and
even the
galaxy itself.
How has that been demonstrated scientifically?
Yes.
That form is around energetically. I mean, they can measure that and see pictures of that. Energetic, because when you talked about toroidal forms, as far as humans, I got the idea of that's where imagination, genius, conscious pours into the toroidal form of us as energy patterns. So we're constantly being fed by this cosmic unknown.
Well, we're light. We're light that has been chasing. Every atom is nothing more than light chasing its tail at a particular frequency.
But okay, so I'm following you so far, sort of. But if we start with, let's say, most people know Platonic Forms.
Sure.
So let's start with the Platonic Forms and see how they reflect consciousness.
You betcha.
The first Platonic Form is the...
Well, we can start with the tetrahedron.
Okay, that is the four-sided
figure of 4 equilateral triangles.
Right.
Plato suggested that was representative of the element fire.
Okay.
And actually, there are very few, shall we say, metaphysical ascribings that I try to promote, because I like people to make their own individual interpretations. But Plato's representation of the elements, I think, are very useful.
Yeah, they're basic.
They're basic, and they tend to bear out. For example, the tetrahedron, if you map a tetrahedron over the sphere of the Earth, placing one point at the North Pole, and then the star tetrahedron inverse, another point at the South Pole, what you end up with is the other 3 points of each pair of tetrahedra at 19.47 actually, degrees north and south latitude.
Sticking out of the side of the sphere.
Well, they would, if you circumscribe the tetrahedron with a sphere completely touching those 4 points, those would where they would contact the surface.
And what do we get at 19 on the Earth?
Well,
what happens
interestingly enough, Mauna Kea, the volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii. You also have Mexico City, the volcano right there. There's another, if you go into the South Pacific, there is a very tiny little speck, if you look at your atlas, if you follow that around, that is a volcanic island.
Really?
Yes, and there's several other places that tend to have, shall we say, fire energy on the planet.
Oh, I see.
So, it's not just limited to this planet, though.
Oh, right, I heard about Mars.
Well, yes, I think Olympus Mons is also at
the great volcano on Mars.
Huge. Relative to the size of the Earth, it would be like several Everests tall, something to that effect.
These are 19 degrees from the North Pole down.
Relative to the North or South Pole. Because you could the pole point makes a natural axis for rotation, which of course is what the Merkaba shape is all about.
And it's also, of course, tilted at 23.5 degrees with the Earth, right?
Well, the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees from the plane of the ecliptic, its axis.
Right. So, but you're measuring from that tip of the pole there. Right. So
we have Mars. We also have the solar flares that are happening.
Oh, on the sun.
At 19.5 degrees. Well, the one I thought was the coolest one that the Voyager probe captured years ago was the moon Io. Jupiter's moon Io had an active volcano, and of course, 19.5 degrees.
So
pretty cool, huh?
So what about if the human...
So that's just the tetrahedron. We could then go to the cube, which is also a hexahedron or six-sided, six squares. We're all familiar with that, sugar cubes and whatever else.
Right.
And that is probably overemphasized in Western civilization.
Because everything is square.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice to honor that and then maybe balance it out with some of the other forms, such as the octahedron, which symbolizes air. That this is a double pyramid made from 4 equilateral triangles on top and 4 on the bottom.
So it's tetrahedrons put together?
No, it's actually 4 equilateral triangles.
Oh, 4 equilateral.
Forming a pyramid. Not the same pyramid as the Great Pyramid.
How many sides?
There's 8.
8 sides.
8 octa for 8.
I see.
So that symbolized air.
I see.
Okay. Which is also a dual to the cube. Basically, if you take the midpoints of each face of the cube and connect the vertices, you get an octahedron.
So how do these
do the same thing with the octahedron? You go back to the cube again. So it's a fractal pattern.
But how does it reflect consciousness? How does it reflect who we are? How does a tetrahedron? How does it impact on us? And how do we use these forms?
How do we use them? Well, that's how we got here to begin with.
What do you mean? Describe that.
Well, that egg that became 2, became 4, became 8. That was a star tetrahedron.
Oh, so you're saying
that was our spaceship. That's how we got here.
You're saying there's basic patterns of life, of the universe that are in these shapes.
Right.
I see.
You find them throughout nature. If you look at crystallography or material science, there's a lot of work that shows that those basic patterns show up again and again and again. And I think the take-home lesson is the interconnectedness. If we could we just finish the 5 Platonic solids.
Please, sorry.
We've gone through the tetrahedron, the octahedron, and the cube. And the other 2 are the icosahedron, which is 20 equilateral triangles. It's the most round shape of the lot.
Right.
And it basically is the symbol for water, which seems appropriate.
Why is that appropriate for water?
Well, to me, water is a very smooth, graceful medium.
Right, okay.
The dodecahedron is the last of the bunch. And if you integrate alchemically within ourselves, as we take the principles of life and within ourselves refine the elements of our existence, earth, air, fire, and water, we become the gold of spirit.
The gold of spirit, the fifth essence, the quintessence.
Exactly, which is really remembering who we already are.
The quintessence is remembering who we already are.
Right.
They're calling dark energy and space quintessence. Did you know that?
I hadn't heard that.
Yes. The missing matter, the void, the 99% of the universe they can't find is this essence of who we are, the void. So what do we do with all these forms now? We have 5 of these Platonic forms.
Right.
How do we work with them, and how does it reflect?
Well, I think one way that's a very easy way to work with forms is just the sense of beauty. I mean, I find artistically to explore these forms from an artistic standpoint is very much a healing practice. Just the reverie of taking a form and zooming in and out on the computer, and then
But what makes it sacred? What the fact that it creates life, and that other geometries don't create life. What about the golden mean? Everyone talks about the golden mean. Okay. Explain that, because I never understood that one.
All right. If you take the pentagon, which is on each face of the dodecahedron, there's 12 of them.
A five-sided
shape, which is a pentagon.
Equal sides, equal angles.
Precisely.
Okay.
That shape, if you connect the sides, skipping a vertex each way around, you get a pentagram, which is a 5-pointed star.
Okay, I got
Now, the intersections of those elements are all in phi proportion, or golden ratio, golden mean, extreme and mean ratio. All those divine proportion, they're all the same thing.
But what does it mean? What does it mean that's divine? I mean, how is it divine?
How it's divine?
Yeah.
It's a proportion which basically says that, for example, if you imagine in your mind,
let's look at.
You don't have to. We've got one right here.
Okay, great. So let's demonstrate.
So, for example, if this arbitrarily is chosen to be 1 unit, I mean, you could define that between these 2 intersecting points of this pentagram.
Right.
That 1 unit relative to this is phi units, or 1.618 times this measurement here. Okay. So there's the golden ratio right there. Now what happens is, because the golden ratio is the quintessence of interconnectedness, the sum of this unity plus this symbol of interconnectedness is phi squared, and that's how it's defined. Which means that there's an arithmetic progression that converges with a geometric progression. A square symbolically is, and I like to think of numbers as symbols.
That's, I think, very important for this this understanding.
Yes. So when you square a number, you're taking it to another dimension. So next time you pick up a math book and you see all these powers and roots, you're actually going up and down in dimension.
So on
a metaphorical level.
So to give an example of give an example of a square that's another dimension, like.
Okay. Well, in this case, we're taking the golden ratio. We're integrating the principle of interconnectedness with unity and raising it to another dimension. Yeah.
What makes it golden?
Well, I think the gold is aptly named because if the pentagon that Plato chose for the face of the dodecahedron has the golden ratio, and his element for spirit was the dodecahedron. We forgot to mention that. Yes. So you have earth, air, fire, and water alchemically becoming the gold when we refine the dross and become. Basically, it's a frequency equation.
It's a frequency.
It really is.
That's what I think sacred geometry gets to.
It is. It's a vibratory law that we're dealing with. There's actually 7 Hermetic laws. The law of mentalism.
Mentalism means all is one.
All is mind. All is one. Yes,
exactly.
The law of
Kybalion by the 3 initiates.
Very good.
I know.
You did your homework.
That book has been a basis for my spiritual
Isn't
understanding.
that a wonderful book?
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time covering that.
The Kybalion, not the Kabbalah. Kybalion by the
3 initiates.
The 3 initiates. Yeah. You can find it at any theosophical bookstore. The first these. So
it's all interconnected.
So what are the 7 laws?
Okay.
So
correspondence is the second one. As above, so below. As below, so above. So we find that when we're inspired, when we have flashes of insight, when we say, "Oh yeah, that's what that dream meant," or as Diane Kennedy Pike in her book "Life as a Waking Dream," if we translate it into physical life, "Oh yeah, that's what this interview with Alan and all these people means." Yeah, it's like okay.
Well, Arnold Mandel says the same thing. If there's a sound in the street, that's my dream. How does it reflect what's going on here?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this is a waking dream.
So there is a resonance factor, which leads us into vibration, which is the third law. Everything is frequency. Everything vibrates. Nothing is at rest.
Vibrating meaning what? Because things are pretty stationary if you look around.
They seem to be.
They do. They do seem to be. If you sit still, you won't be vibrating. I mean,
I vibrate even when I'm asleep.
I know, but how
especially
do you
this week.
Vibration to a world that looks static?
Okay. We have to get down to the microcosm again.
Okay.
We're made, even modern physics will tell us that the atom never rests.
Yeah.
The electron clouds are, probability density. Of course,
quantum fluctuations is what.
But it still resolves to a vibratory phenomena.
Things pulse.
Right.
I mean, this universe is pulsing on and off.
Yeah. I mean, we're awash in a sea of electromagnetic energy. So light, which is what we are ultimately, is electromagnetic. And when it congeals down and condenses down into material form, we have what we call atoms and all that good stuff.
Do you believe this universe is pulsing on and off at a certain rate?
Actually, yes. And in fact, there's a wonderful little book a lady named Robin McWayne wrote called Radical Reality.
Radical Reality.
And yes, and she talks about, she came and gave a talk to our New Frontiers group in Northern California a few years ago. She has a delightful way of presenting modern physics in a really accessible way. A couple of things that were little mental snapshots for me from her talks were the universe, according to modern physics, literally winks in and out of existence 10 to the 44th times per second.
Wow.
That's pretty darn rapid. So we're living in a stroboscopic reality
where it appears continuous, but
right. There's some jumps there that
well, that's why the masters, when they got control of time, could move this body anywhere they want within time space.
Or as Richard Bach in Illusion says, how is it that the illusion of this non-corporeal, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact thing, how is it that you can move the illusion of your body through this illusion of a wall and get through the other side without any doors, that sort of thing. Yeah.
That's a math master. But so anyway,
it's all vibration.
It's all vibration.
Yes.
That's the fourth law. Or is it
third
okay.
law?
The fourth law being
polarity, and our world really could use a dose of understanding polarity right now, or so it would seem.
You mean where there's light, there's dark, where there's good, there's bad. How do you describe polarity?
Well, polarity is there are opposites in everything. Now, the key word there is thing, because ultimately we're all one.
Right.
The great void, the great oneness, the great unity that we are, is the singularity. So there's no polarity there. But in the manifest reality of things, including our physical bodies and the manifestations that we spend so much time hanging out and our emphasis with, things have polarity. I mean, we could create a line between our two bodies, and there's things that are closer to your body and closer to my body.
There are things that are me, there's things that aren't
hot, there's cold, there's yin and yang, pick a polarity, any polarity.
So everything is divided into polarities.
Right.
All right, and that's just a basic physical and metaphysical law.
Right. So the way we transcend polarities, which can be mapped on a one-dimensional line, is we do what Einstein suggested. Never try to solve things at the same level on which they were created. I'm paraphrasing again. That wonderful cliche that we all use these days.
Right.
You go to another dimension. Orthogonally, create a 90-degree angle.
It's not so easy to go to, and especially when you're living at this level, right? How do we go to
the pragmatic take-home lesson for the law of polarity is even if you can't physically step back, emotionally step back. Find the place within yourself. A la the Vesica Pisces. Where's the common meeting point? And the Vesica Pisces, of course, defines an equilateral triangle. A pair of them.
As above, so below.
So you get off the line, you say, okay, here's this point where we share a perspective. There may be this side and that side, but seen from another dimension, quote unquote, we find the commonality.
Okay, I got you.
And appropriately enough, that comes from the heart.
Yeah,
that's really
because this is the center point.
Yeah.
This is the as above.
Exactly.
This is where it all meets.
Exactly. Right.
So the next law then would be
the next law after polarity is rhythm.
And how do you describe
There's rhythm in everything. Motion to and fro.
There's nothing that doesn't have rhythm?
No thing that doesn't have rhythm, yes. Yeah. We have cycles from our heartbeats.
It's sort of
to
a
our
higher
breath.
level of the second law, right, of vibration.
In a sense, yes. One could be considered a macroscopic and one a microscopic version of the same principle.
Right.
In fact, I was just telling Slim Sperling, one of the presenters here, about an image he had on one of his graphs that connected with a dream that I had as a very young human. In fact, as early as back as I can remember, I had this dream that was an incredibly long span of time, eons, that was this sine wave, basically, a rhythm.
Right.
Which also, and the paradox was not evident in the dream, there was no confusion, but it was also the fastest vibration that one could possibly conceive of. There was no time. In other words, an eon of a gazillion years was also an infinitesimal moment.
And this was a dream.
This was a dream. And I had this dream, and I didn't know how to describe it until I was much older and knew how to talk. But I think I was being prepped for getting into all this stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like you can start to integrate this idea of timelessness into your sacred geometry.
Yes.
Now, how do you do that?
Well, I think when we find that still point within ourselves, we become attuned to the external rhythms and go with that flow.
So the still point is where all these forms are generated from.
Right.
Is that what you said?
Right.
So what's the
void, the great void.
And what's the last law of the seven?
Well, we could go to the sixth.
Oh, the sixth,
which is cause and effect.
And which they're proving doesn't quite really hold up because...
Well, it's kind of gotten a bad rap lately. I think what happens is we have such an incredibly minuscule perception of the great universe that we live in. We see about an octave. We hear about 10 octaves out of a lot of octaves. I think there's about 80 octaves of electromagnetic energy that our science can measure or detect in some fashion.
And also the light. The visible light is so small.
But Maxwell's equations say that can keep going infinitely low in frequency and infinitely high in frequency, like that dream I had.
Right.
So, as a result, we don't really have that much of a handle on the big picture with our physical senses. So
as
we
far
have
as
to
cause and effect, but
yeah, well, not just because of the simplification and the simplistic notion that, well, it's just one cause and one effect. It's a fractal holographic system. Everything in the universe has come together to create the moment of this interview.
That's nice. Being preserved.
And you saying that nice. That's nice.
No, it's, isn't that nice?
It's true. I mean, it's a cosmic fractal. That has so cause and effect. If you pick out one little thing, you can say, "Oh, the billiard ball theory is so deterministic and reductionist."
No, I don't believe that. But I also think something we may have done in the future will then have an impact in the past. But that may also be a cause and effect backwards in time.
Right. It's like the branches and roots of a tree are a great metaphor. I mean, each moment. We're at the singularity point, which is the trunk of the tree.
Where the past and future meet.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
okay.
And then we branch out. But there's also parallel realities and other dimensions. We know mathematically that you take the Platonic solids, which exist in 3 dimensions. People like Coxeter and Schlafly, mathematicians, decades ago, figured out that there are 6 regular polytopes that exist in 4 dimensions.
What does that mean, the polytope?
Well, okay.
That exists in how many dimensions?
Have you seen a stereogram? The things where the magic eye sorts of things where you look at a page and all these patterns and suddenly, whoa, there's this thing that jumps out. Well, okay, there's an example of being able to shift your reality to perceive, sort of in an artificial way, but a fun one, another dimension.
That's right. I see that.
Right. So what happens is this reality, mathematically, has been shown to be a shadow, but a mere shadow of a much greater reality.
Really? I mean, I believe that, but I want to
Physics is telling us that.
Yeah.
String theory says there's got to be 11 dimensions, at least, just to make all that stuff work. And they're still working on it.
But so when getting back to the still point, then we touch those other levels of reality when we get back to that still point outside of time.
Exactly.
Because we exist ultimately outside of the time.
Right.
Space continuum. Outside.
And some of the easiest ways are just to tune into the feeling of compassion, of humor, joyousness. Anything that jolts us out of the left brain stuff. I saw a great cartoon that I was hoping to use for this conference that I did get permission from Gary Larson because I didn't know how to get it. But it was Professor So-and-so introduces his new therapy for overcompulsive thinkers, and it's his brain stapling technique, right? I thought that was pretty cute. So anyway, but
how do these forms exist within a fourth dimension? What is the fourth dimension? Time?
Not necessarily. I think there's other dimensions. I think some candidates for other dimensions might be rotational velocity and phase. Things like that tie into it. I really can't speak.
I mean, what would a cube look like in a fourth dimension?
Okay, in a fourth dimension, there's a shape called a hypercube.
And what does that look like?
Well, we can see shadows of it. Have you ever heard of the book called Flatland?
Yes, yes.
That's a wonderful analogous thing. So if you lived in Flatland and somebody in your plane, your little two-dimensional plane, pushed a pencil through your world, your piece of paper, you would suddenly say, "Oh God, I'm hallucinating again. Right. Here's this black dot, this big circle of graphite, and it's getting bigger and bigger. Now there's this wooden hexagon around it, and now it's got yellow, paint around it, and then now it's turned into a pink circle, and the eraser, and then but it disappeared. What was that? God, get me something. I'm hallucinating again." And we have these mystical experiences, and we think, "Oh well, That's so out there, but we only see 3 dimensions out of what we know from modern physics.
So the real mystical experience is someone who's able to, let's say, or magic, able to manipulate beyond the 3D into a science of fourth or fifth dimensional.
Right. And mathematics is leading us in that direction with people like Coxeter and Schlafly who've developed these models that are the 6 polytopes, which would be you go from a line segment to a polygon, like a triangle, to a tetrahedron, which would be a polyhedron.
Yes.
So the general term is a polytope, going up into arbitrarily.
A polytope would be a fourth dimensional.
That's one example of it. Polychoron, I believe, is the fourth dimensional form specifically.
But for a tetrahedron?
The tetrahedral analog would be a simplex.
And that's only fourth dimension.
That's only fourth dimensional. And the shadow of that, depending on what angle you're looking at it, or the cross-section of it, is a three-dimensional object.
Right.
So we are like cross-sectional slices through a fourth-dimensional reality.
We being humans.
Yeah.
Or even fifth dimension. What would be what would you call that? And what would that be described as?
Well, from the fifth dimensions on, if my recent research via the web is correct, and there's some great websites out there, by the way. Just search on people like Coxeter and Schlafly, and you'll see
how do you spell Coxeter? For
Coxeter, who just went into another dimensional realm a year or two ago.
Okay.
He basically created some wonderful math that is being used by modern physics to describe this.
So they're saying
they're saying that we're shadows.
This human form is shadow. Well,
a higher
mystics
dimensional
have
reality,
always knew
which
that.
is kind of where we started the conversation here. We're vast multidimensional beings.
I mean,
but we hang out in this 3 or 4.
Well, we don't. Yeah, we
most
hang
of the
out
time with our consciousness,
right? With our limited but on another level, we're hanging out always on those other dimensions anyway.
Right.
That's how this
not to worry.
No.
This is all a wonderful school of illusion.
Yeah. So how many? I mean, string theory says there's only 10 dimensions. Are there an infinite amount of dimensions?
11 is what I heard, but
11.
But,
maybe I wasn't
whatever.
counting.
Yeah.
But
the theory may change tomorrow.
No, but how many dimensions does this guy say? Or is there infinite amount of dimensions?
Well, yeah. I
Really?
mean, the mathematical models don't have an end to them.
I mean, the Hindu Vedas say maybe there's
of.
108 layers of bodies.
But again, I'm kind of getting out of my area of
but
familiarity.
Just the fact that
I think theoretically they just keep going. Yeah.
But the fact that they can prove that they exist is something that we have to start to become aware of.
Well, I mean, in one sense, prove is a difficult word because we're in flatland here. You and I are in flatland.
We are.
We're watching the pencils go through and say, "Whoa, National Enquirer time!" Let's.
So to get out of flatland, we have to sit in that still point in us and start to see these higher dimensional consciousness levels.
And we get it through things like lucid dreaming or reveries or just feeling the resonance with a kindred soul,
right?
Sitting on a couch. It's like, hey, there's something going on here that's more than just physical reality.
That's right.
When you see a person smile.
Yeah, when you see a person smile, when you look into their eyes and have that connection on a soul level, you're seeing more than a 3D replica.
The mirror of the soul.
Yeah.
Which is back to the Vesica Pisces. You can't really escape sacred geometry unless you really want to, but it'll be there waiting for you when you get back.
So everything you in your world, because this is your life, and you've been able to present it to people so they can understand sacred geometry in terms of their life and soul connections. Everything can be seen in that.
Yeah.
Whether we're spheres of consciousness.
I mean, don't get the idea that everything I do is seeing Vesica Pisces floating in front of my eyes.
Well, every interaction is a Vesica Pisces.
It is.
Yes.
I think what the take-home lesson is if we can just gently remind ourselves when we feel like we're kind of getting a little off track to just notice the gifts, the presence that arrive moment by moment in our lives that show up sometimes as geometric forms. Sometimes they'll show up as numbers.
But geometric forms people can't relate to emotionally unless they have a kind of code to it, right?
Well, shape. When you see different shapes, there's a visceral reaction. So there is an emotional connection.
It's true. I was looking at these shapes of these roses. I was working with roses, and they have just an amazing curve, like a woman or something like this curve that's just so sensual.
Right.
And it really did affect me. Yeah. But we're looking at so many boxes, we kind of shut down and don't want to just see those cubes. We want to be stimulated by other forms. So maybe you're right. We are affected by shapes in the way that we disconnect or connect.
Right.
The roundness of the eyes pulls us in. The colors and all that. But the last law in the Kabbalion, I don't think we covered. The seventh law was...
No, we didn't.
No, and what is that?
We talked about the fractal nature of cause and effect. The seventh law, which is sort of the culmination, the crown chakra, if you will, of the seven, and they actually mirror both ways, in a sense, is gender or generation.
Which means
that even though we appear to be taking man-woman forms as 3D critters, we have masculine and feminine principles within us. Every cell of our body has a spiral of two two strands making this dance in the DNA, which also has the Fibonacci proportions, 34 to 21 angstroms for each turn of the spiral. But gender isn't everything. To back up, the law of gender says gender isn't everything. The masculine and feminine principles are everything. In men, it's the anima. In women, it's the animus.
It's the aggressive and receptive, or the active the receiving and giving.
Right,
it's like so. That's a universal principle.
Correct.
Even within geometric forms?
Right.
In what way within geometric forms does that exist?
It's the principle of creation. In order to manifest everything, in a physical reality, obviously you need male and female to create the offspring. A triangle is a perfect example, metaphorically. You have the X and Y axes, and then you have the hypotenuse. Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Pick your cultural metaphor.
So, getting back, the Egyptians knew this because Plato was part of the...
and they didn't try to divide everything up and, now we're going to study geometry. Now we're going to study biology, but don't combine, it was all one thing.
Well, because the
philosophy was all integrated.
And the building of their temples was the most sacred of the sciences.
Right.
And that's where the Masonic, just the Freemasons come out of, the fact that I don't think their architectural...
I went through the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge a few years back.
You did?
Yeah, quite a few years back.
But Egyptian...
It's wonderful symbolism.
But architecture wasn't really written. It was an oral tradition, right?
Exactly.
And that's where the Masonics come.
Past, and mouth to ear.
Mouth to ear. And that's why, Schwaller de Lubitz, the Temple of Man, they duplicated the...
You know a lot about this, Steph.
Well,
you kind of not know
no,
about it.
I didn't say it. No, I just said I want to know what you know. Because it's not my...
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I think, there's so much out there. Michael Schneider's book, The Beginner's
Michael's a good friend,
that's a brilliant book.
Yes,
there's so much...
I usually recommend that with mine. And
with yours. Well, give some of your information.
Oh, sure.
Because, how can people find out about you and your website and your talk?
Here's the commercial.
Okay.
www.intent.com, INTENT is the website. And you can also email me through there if you want to connect with me, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, everything is built from intent.
It is. Yeah, when my wife Nancy said, "Hey, that one's not taken. How about that one?" I said, "Yeah." So when URLs were more plentiful a few years back.
I'm here with Bruce Rawles, Rawles, and you're living in
Northern California, Nevada City, east of Sacramento in the foothills, up toward Tahoe.
And you gave your website www.intent. There's lectures on there and everything. Is there anything else in this basic understanding that we should cover?
Do we have time to talk about the Martineau?
Well, we'll do a separate. We'll show up, or should we do that?
Well, maybe just briefly.
Yeah. Let's talk about who...
Just to tie what we're sitting behind it.
Okay.
Because these are shapes that represent orbits of the planets that this brilliant mathematician, geometer, crop circle researcher living with us today in England, John Martineau, discovered, basically taking the work of Johannes Kepler and completing, in a sense, what Kepler would have loved to have done to find simple geometrical relationships with the orbits of the planets.
Well, describe what we're seeing here.
Okay. These are two actually of the more complex ones, but they're kind of my favorite, so I set them up
the one behind you?
Okay, sure. That's a real simple one. We can do that real quick. This one, they're all really pretty simple, but this is probably the simplest of the bunch. This one is an equilateral triangle.
Yes.
And a circle. And at each vertex of that triangle, you have 3 other circles that just exactly touch each other, and around that circle is yet another circle. And I've just basically done an artistic rendition of it. The beauty of this model, which describes the orbit of Mercury and the orbit of Venus, is that it is 99.9% accurate.
What do you mean the orbit of Mercury and Venus? Where's the orbit?
This would be the orbit of Mercury.
Around the center point of the Sun.
Exactly, with the Sun in the center.
In ratio relationships to the Sun.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I did the math just because I was curious. It's like, is this really that accurate? And it is.
And then the outer circle is the orbit of Venus.
Exactly.
And the triangle...
And there's a whole bunch of models in his book, Little Book of Coincidence, which I highly recommend to people.
But of course you have to remind the people that orbits are elliptical.
Correct. But if you average it into a circle...
Yes, okay.
This is what was used. Right.
Okay. And then what does that do for us? What is that...
What it does for me is like further evidence that we ain't living in a random universe. There's some divine order going on here, folks.
Well, there is a divine pattern to the places that the planets are. The relationship of the planets are to each other, right? Isn't it like some mathematical formulas? Mercury is to Venus as Venus is to the Earth.
This is Kepler was on the right track. He tried to describe that with nested polyhedra. He had the octahedron and the dodecahedron and nested inside of spheres, and had this wonderful woodcut which you can find on the web in different places that described this model that he was passionate about. In fact, the reason that we have our laws of gravitation and in order to, how we got into space, basically, one of the main reasons that
was Kepler devised
Kepler's
these
three laws, But what he was trying to find was the relationship of the planets. Those laws were just a byproduct of his mystical passion to find out this information.
I mean, the orbit
but he was so close.
Of Mercury to the Sun is then doubled from Venus to the Sun. Is that
no? It's not quite a whole number ratio.
Oh.
If you do the math with this triangle and these circles, you don't even need a three-dimensional model to do it. It's all just planar geometry.
Okay.
You'll find, I don't have the numbers memorized, but I did the math, and it really is 99% accurate.
Okay.
And, you can see from here, it's kind of, sort of.
But then you take the orbit of the Earth, it has a similar geometric proportion, and then
there is roughly like a Fibonacci connection.
Well, how do you explain it to a rational scientist who says no, it's all a coincidence, an accident?
It's kind of like the Great Pyramid, when people say, well, it's just kind of a random collection of stone, It's like, well, there's a few things there, like the laser accuracy in the descending passageway, the alignment of the faces to 5 degrees, 5 minutes of a degree, and a few things like that, when you start adding up so many synchronicities and coincidences, at a certain point you've got to say, okay, what's really going on here?
So the ancients really had a great understanding of the science of manifested form in the sacred.
Absolutely.
And Kepler was sort of the last in that line of...
Well, no, I wouldn't say that, but he certainly had carried the torch of that quest to a great degree in that way.
But now we're reviving that science.
Right.
And crop circles is a great example of sacred geometric...
So much wealth of information.
What are they telling to us? I mean, forget about who's doing it, but what are they saying sacred geometrically?
Thank you for asking it in that way, because so many people say, where's the UFOs and ETs?
I mean, that's another show, but what are they saying as a sacred geometrist? Yes.
Well, there's a wealth of information. You could look at any one of the crop circles, and Martineau, again, is one of the pioneers in this field. Mm-hmm. He basically has shown things like, for example, patterns of simple circles that look like they're sort of just kind of arbitrary. And then if you just draw pentagrams over the top of them, carefully placed, you discover there's some alignments that you take the circular portion of the pentagon and the intersection of the pentagram, and represents the smaller formation. And then the outer formation is the outer points of the pentagon. I forget the name of the formation.
But is it saying anything to us on consciousness or on a spiritual level?
Definitely.
Like what?
This is going to sound like I'm evading your question, perhaps, but when you see a flower, or you see a beautiful work of art, how do you quantify that?
Okay.
I mean, sure you can. You can.
Well, I know what you're saying, but
dissect it into pixels and say, sure. Well, there's this RGB value here, but
I also
the gestalt is.
It's true. There's a gestalt from the beauty, but I do when I look at crop circles, I get information.
Exactly. There you go. That's it.
I don't know what I'm getting, but maybe on these like fourth or fifth dimensional levels, I am.
There you go.
Okay.
So what if our rational mind, the pi ratio is not only an irrational number, it's a transcendental number.
You can't even go to transcendental number.
A transcendental number is a number which, even with the polynomial derivation, cannot be resolved exactly.
Okay.
So just the circle. The circle transcends the rational mind.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to understand it rationally.
No,
I think it's important
it speaks to me. So a circle then speaks to me, I guess.
Yes.
And
there is a language, though, that I think goes in more directly.
Yeah.
In the same way that you and I are looking in each other's eyes and saying, there's a soul here that's connecting.
That's right.
That how could you quantify that?
You can't quantify the soul.
There's an electromagnetic something or other that happens between each human on the planet. We're woven together in this fabric.
So who's ever doing the crop circles are encoding us with these fourth, fifth, sixth dimensional
It's a language. I think it's an alphabet we're being given.
I think it is too, and we're not understanding it on these 3D terms, but on these higher levels that we exist, we are getting that information.
Correct. That would be my assessment.
I agree with you. I agree.
And at the same time, there is mathematics. For example, I think it's Gerald Hawkins is the mathematician's name, who derived three or four new postulates of mathematics. I need to study those again.
No, I heard they're new, original, sacred geometric forms haven't even been devised.
All the Greeks came up with these basic theorems and postulates, and and it kind of coasted along for a few millennia. And they're like, whoa, new ones, folks. With
the crop circles,
perk your ears up. Yeah. And they hadn't been discovered until the crop circles were analyzed.
So we're really at the beginning of a renaissance of sacred geometry and the crop circles and your work and many other work.
I mean, if we're just learning the alphabet,
and
trying to formulate it into words in a very limited language we call English, and geometry might be a more sophisticated language that goes in direct. It doesn't require translation.
That's a good way of looking at your work. You're really starting us off on the right track of understanding more complex language.
That's my intention. I hope that's being achieved.
Especially when you remind people we're only living in a flat land. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's been a joy.
It has been. I've got it on many different levels here.
Good. Me too. I mean, it all reinforces for me. Because now I'll say, oh yeah, that's right. All this stuff I was sharing with people really does work, and I'll practice it more myself too.
Yeah, because energetically we're all
trying to learn this stuff.
Yeah, we're trying to learn it, we're trying to understand it, we're trying to feel it.
Right. Most importantly.
And then evolve our soul because of the influx of information and feeling.
Right.
So you're really combining feeling and intellect within this sacred geometric form.
There's that seventh law again.
Yeah.
The feminine and the masculine, the feeling, the thought.
The feeling and the thought. And then we can take that all to higher levels of consciousness as well. Right. Well, thank you. There's a lot here. I'll have to watch the tape to really understand what we got. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm talking to Bruce Rawles, and you can find out about him at www.intent.com. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and you can reach me at newrealitiestv.com or look for other interviews at the emerald-energies.com website. And thank you for watching. And you can email me at newrealities@earthlink.net. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.